She would never imagine that a single $10 bill could change the course of her life forever. The rain poured down relentlessly over the empty train station platform, turning puddles into mirrors that reflected the dim glow of the flickering neon signs. Emily Harris pulled her worn coat tighter around her thin frame, her fingers numb from the cold, and glanced at the crumpled bills in her pocket. She had exactly $10 left, the last money she had until the next paycheck, and it was meant for a small meal. Her heart pounded as she noticed a man standing a few feet away, shivering violently, his coat thin and his shoes soaked. The blue of his eyes, tired and pleading, met hers, and something inside her stirred. Without thinking, she stepped forward and extended her hand, holding out the $10 bill. He hesitated, his lips parting as if to protest, but he simply nodded and took it, murmuring a soft thank you that barely rose above the sound of the rain. Emily watched him move toward the ticket booth, unsure if she had done the right thing, yet feeling a strange warmth despite the chill. Her thoughts were interrupted as she realized her own stomach growled in protest, reminding her of the long hours since her last meal and the uncertainty of where she would sleep tonight. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. The man disappeared into the misty crowd, leaving Emily alone on the platform, her hands still tingling from the brief contact and her mind racing with questions. Who was he really, and why did helping him feel like more than a random act of kindness? As she folded her coat around herself and trudged toward the exit, the flashing neon reflected on the wet tiles seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her heartbeat, echoing the nervous anticipation that something extraordinary had just begun. Emily barely noticed the time passing, her eyes constantly scanning the few passengers still waiting, half expecting him to return. Every flicker of movement made her turn, only to be met with empty space and the soft patter of rain. The chill in her bones contrasted sharply with the warmth in her chest, a reminder that even small gestures could ignite possibilities. Far beyond what the eye could see, the train roared into the station, its lights cutting through the gray curtain of rain, and Emily hesitated, wondering if this fleeting encounter could truly be the start of something that would upend her entire world. Her thoughts swirled with both fear and excitement, unsure if she was braver than her circumstances or simply foolish, as the echoes of her footsteps blended with the distant whistle of the train, signaling the moment her ordinary life collided with an extraordinary one. Emily walked away from the train platform with a mixture of apprehension and quiet satisfaction, her mind replaying the brief encounter over and over. She could still feel the residual warmth from her hand brushing against the stranger's fingers, and the soft sound of his voice saying thank you lingered in her ears. As she trudged down the wet city streets, puddles reflecting the street lights like tiny, distorted moons, she could not help but think about the precariousness of her own situation. Her apartment rent was overdue, and she had been scraping by with part-time shifts at the coffee shop, barely enough to cover the smallest necessities. Her stomach ached from the skipped meals, and the thought of facing another day of uncertainty pressed down on her chest like the heavy March rain. She ducked under the awning of a closed shop, hugging her coat tighter around herself, and wondered if acts of kindness were always met with consequences, or if they simply existed in a vacuum, unnoticed by the world. The image of the man she had helped remained vivid in her mind, his soaked jacket and exhausted eyes etched into her memory. She did not know his story, and yet she felt a strange connection to this unknown figure, as if their lives had briefly intersected for a reason beyond chance. Walking past the dimly lit subway entrance, she hesitated, momentarily torn between seeking shelter underground or pressing on to find the small library she often visited when her shifts ended late. The library was her sanctuary, a place where she could hide from the relentless pressures of life, where she could read and forget for a while the gnawing weight of bills and obligations. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, a comforting contrast to the damp chill outside. She claimed her usual corner by the historical archives section, curling into herself and placing her backpack beside her, pulling out a notebook she used to jot fleeting thoughts and sketches during rare moments of peace. Even though her stomach growled and her limbs ached from cold and fatigue, she opened the notebook and tried to write, letting the words spill in a stream of consciousness, thoughts bouncing between worry and wonder, practicality and fantasy. She could not shake the feeling that the man from the train station had somehow left an impression on her that was deeper than any ordinary encounter. As she flipped through the pages, she found herself sketching his figure from memory, the way he had stood, hunched against the rain, and the faint trace of warmth that seemed to emanate from him despite the cold. She imagined his life, wondering what circumstances had led him to be at the station, to appear so vulnerable and human. The hours slipped by almost unnoticed, the quiet of the library cocooning her from the outside world, and she realized that her act of giving, simple as it was, had stirred something in her, a sense of hope, a reminder that human connection, even fleeting, mattered. At some point, fatigue forced her to rest her head against her folded arms, the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional rustle of pages the only sounds. She dreamed vaguely of rain-soaked streets and neon reflections, of the man whose face she could not forget, and the mysterious possibilities that the next day might bring. Her mind lingered on the thought that life could be altered by the smallest gestures, and though she did not know it yet, this $10 bill had already begun to weave threads that would entangle her destiny with someone whose world was so far removed from her own. Outside, the city continued on an indifferent rhythm, street lights flickering against the mist, cars splashing through puddles, and distant voices echoing faintly. Inside the library, Emily remained still, wrapped in her coat and thoughts, the weight of her hardships softened by a glimmer of anticipation for what might follow, the awareness that in the midst of struggle, kindness had planted a seed that would not easily be forgotten. The next morning arrived with the chill of early March still clinging to the city streets. Emily Harris awoke in her small apartment, the morning light dim through the thin, cracked blinds. Her back ached from the lumpy mattress, and her stomach protested at the thought of skipping breakfast once again. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb the few neighbors she could hear stirring in the cramped building. The apartment was sparsely furnished, with only the essentials and a few personal items scattered across the floor, remnants of a life she had been trying to hold together despite constant setbacks. Emily pulled on her coat, still damp from the rain of the previous evening, and stepped into the chilly hallway. The air smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning products, a constant reminder of the modest conditions she had been forced to endure. She hesitated at the door, glancing down the narrow staircase to the street below, and wondered how she would survive another day of uncertain shifts, looming bills, and job applications that often led to rejection. The memory of the stranger at the train station lingered, his grateful eyes and gentle demeanor occupying her thoughts despite her focus on her own struggles. The $10 bill she had given him felt like a small act of rebellion against the harshness of her own circumstances, a moment where she could assert some control over the kindness she still carried. As she made her way down the street, the city was just beginning to wake, the faint hum of buses and cars punctuated by distant footsteps and the occasional bark of a dog. She navigated puddles carefully, mindful of her worn shoes that had long since lost any semblance of waterproofing. Each step reminded her of how exposed she felt, both physically and emotionally, to the indifference of the world around her. Her destination was the coffee shop where she worked, a place she had come to know as both sanctuary and trial. The manager, strict and often impatient, rarely offered praise, yet was the only place that provided her with the means to keep food in her stomach and a roof over her head, even if it was tenuous and temporary. She pushed open the door, the warmth inside a sharp contrast to the damp chill of the morning, and was greeted by the familiar scent of brewed coffee and pastries. She moved quickly to the back, changing into her uniform and preparing for the rush of morning customers. Despite the mechanical motions, her mind wandered back to the man from the station, imagining where he might be now and whether he had arrived at his destination safely. Each interaction with customers that morning seemed to bring echoes of that encounter, a reminder of the possibility that not all people were indifferent, that some still carried an innate goodness even amidst the anonymity of the city. By mid-morning, Emily found herself taking a brief moment to sit by the window, fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, thinking about her next steps and the fragile thread of hope that had been ignited by her small act of generosity. The day passed in a blur of orders, cleaning, and polite interactions. Yet every time the bell above the door chimed, her heart skipped slightly, half expecting to see the man who had unknowingly stirred something within her. She imagined the rain running off his coat, the way his eyes had reflected gratitude and vulnerability, and she felt an unexplainable anticipation that life might shift in ways she had not yet dared to consider. The streets outside remained gray and damp, a reflection of the uncertainty she faced, yet within her, a quiet determination grew. The knowledge that her gesture, however small, had meaning to someone else gave her a sense of purpose, a fragile but real connection that had begun to thread through the ordinary monotony of her life. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets, Emily packed her bag for the evening, her mind filled with both anxiety and hope, unaware that her small act of kindness had already set in motion a chain of events that would alter both her life and the life of the man she had helped in ways she could not yet imagine. Emily left the coffee shop as the evening settled over the city, the streets glistening from an earlier drizzle that had left everything damp and reflective. She clutched her bag closer to her side, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing against her shoulders, but there was a faint lift in her chest, a sense that perhaps the world had not entirely lost its softness. The walk to the small library where she often spent her nights was familiar, each corner and lamppost marking a path she knew too well. As she approached the building, she noticed a figure standing across the street, half obscured by the shadows of the tall buildings and the dim glow of the street lamps. The man was tall, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, and he wore a long, dark coat that seemed slightly damp from the lingering drizzle. Emily paused, a shiver running down her spine that was not entirely from the cool evening air. He seemed to be watching her, though she could not tell if he was waiting for someone or simply observing the passers-by. For a moment, she considered turning away, convincing herself that it was impossible, that it had been nothing more than a fleeting encounter at the train station. Yet something compelled her to keep walking. As she entered the library, the warmth and the soft hum of fluorescent lights welcomed her, the scent of old books and polished wood immediately comforting. She settled into her usual corner, laying her bag beside her and pulling out her notebook to escape into sketches and thoughts. But her attention was drawn repeatedly to the figure she had glimpsed outside. Minutes passed, and she found herself sketching the outline of a man in a coat. The impression of presence she could not quite explain forming in her mind. Her pencil moved instinctively, tracing lines that captured the essence of that quiet intensity she had seen. The library was nearly empty, the occasional rustle of pages and soft footsteps of other patrons breaking the silence. Yet her heart seemed to beat in a rhythm set entirely by the memory of that man. She could not help but imagine his story, the circumstances that had brought him to the station, standing alone in the rain, and why his gaze had seemed to linger even after their brief encounter. A sense of intrigue mingled with cautious curiosity, a desire to understand the connection that had sparked so unexpectedly, and a recognition that something significant might unfold from what had seemed like a simple act of kindness. As the evening deepened, the library lights cast gentle shadows across her notes and sketches, and she felt a quiet anticipation, a sense that the events of the night were the beginning of a thread that might weave her world together with that of a stranger in ways she could not yet comprehend. She reflected on the vulnerability she had witnessed, the fleeting intimacy of shared humanity in that moment, and how it contrasted with the often indifferent city around her. Despite the uncertainty and the weight of her own struggles, there was a spark of hope that lingered, fragile but persistent, suggesting that even in the midst of hardship, The lives of strangers could intersect and shift in ways that might redefine the course of her days. Emily looked out through the rain-speckled windows, her thoughts filled with the man in the coat, the echo of gratitude in his voice, and the possibility that their brief encounter at the train station was not the end, but the beginning of a story yet to be revealed. She returned her gaze to her notebook, her pencil moving once again, capturing not just images but the sense of curiosity, anticipation, and quiet wonder that had taken root, aware that life had a way of surprising those who dared to give even a small portion of themselves to others, and that the night held more than just darkness, but the promise of connection, understanding, and perhaps an unexpected turn that would forever change the trajectory of both their lives. The following day carried with it a quiet anticipation that Emily Harris could not shake, a lingering awareness of the man from the train station and the small thread of connection they had shared. She moved through the city streets with a sense of purpose that was both fragile and persistent, her steps echoing against the wet pavement, and her coat still damp from the drizzle that had fallen the night before. As she approached the old community kitchen, where she often volunteered for a few hours when she could afford to, she felt the weight of her own struggles pressing against her, yet a flicker of hope urged her onward. Inside, the warm glow of the lights and the gentle murmur of conversation offered a comforting contrast to the cold, gray world outside, and she was immediately drawn to the rhythm of the place. The familiar clatter of pots and pans, the aroma of simmering soup and freshly baked bread, and the quiet laughter of people finding solace in the simple act of being fed. As Emily moved through the kitchen, handing out bowls of soup and chatting quietly with the regulars, her mind wandered repeatedly to the stranger she had helped, imagining who he might be and why he had seemed so vulnerable in the rain. She remembered the precise way he had taken the $10 bill from her hand, the brief catch in his voice, and the sense of gravity in his eyes that suggested there was more to his story than she could guess. She had often wondered if kindness alone could ripple beyond the immediate moment, creating consequences that were unseen and far-reaching, and the memory of that encounter reinforced the notion that her actions, however small, had meaning. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the rhythm of the kitchen providing a steady cadence to her thoughts, yet each sound seemed to echo with the possibility of a return, a sign, a glimpse of the man who had stirred something within her. During a quiet lull, she stepped outside to the small alley behind the kitchen, the night air crisp and scented faintly with the remnants of rain and earth. She paused at the edge of the sidewalk, scanning the street for movement, half expecting to see a familiar figure emerge from the shadows, and the anticipation tightened in her chest with a mix of hope and apprehension. The city hummed around her, a tapestry of lights, distant voices, and the occasional honk of a car horn. And in that moment, she felt simultaneously insignificant and profoundly connected to a larger story unfolding just beyond her perception. It was in this space of tension and quiet expectation that she noticed a figure leaning casually against the corner of the building across the street, the dim streetlight catching the outline of a long dark coat and a hat pulled low. Her heart skipped a beat as recognition slowly dawned, the features familiar despite the obscuring shadows, and a shiver ran down her spine not from the cold, but from the sudden, undeniable awareness that he had returned. She froze, her breath caught between excitement and disbelief as he straightened, his eyes meeting hers across the distance with a measured intensity that made the city fade around them. For a long moment, neither moved, the only sound the faint dripping of water from the gutters and the distant rumble of traffic. Emily felt a surge of curiosity and fear, a compelling need to understand why he was here and whether their lives were about to intersect once more, in ways she could not yet imagine. Finally, the man tipped his head in a subtle gesture of acknowledgement, and she felt an involuntary smile tug at her lips, a mixture of relief, anticipation, and the stirrings of something that could become far more significant than either of them could predict. In the back of her mind, Emily understood that this encounter, coming on the heels of a chance act of kindness, had the potential to unravel and reconstruct the paths of both their lives, and she took a cautious step forward, her pulse quickening with the possibility that the ordinary world she knew might soon shift into something extraordinary. The next encounter between Emily Harris and the mysterious man unfolded in the quiet, almost deserted parking lot behind the community kitchen. Henry Miles had been waiting there for some time, leaning against the cold metal railing, his coat still damp from the morning drizzle that had left the streets slick and shiny. Emily approached cautiously, her heart beating faster with each step, unsure whether she should acknowledge him or retreat into the safety of anonymity. When their eyes met across the small expanse, recognition sparked immediately, a mixture of relief, curiosity, and the faint twinge of apprehension passing between them. Henry pushed off from the railing and walked slowly toward her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, posture relaxed but deliberate, as if measuring the distance not only physically but emotionally as well. Emily could see the faint shadows under his eyes, a hint that he had not slept well, yet there was a steadiness in his gaze that suggested patience and quiet confidence. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag, and forced herself to meet his eyes fully. He smiled faintly, a subtle acknowledgment of their shared history. And for a moment, the noise of the city seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of them suspended in the muted glow of the streetlights. Henry spoke first, his voice low but clear, asking if she was all right, if the rain had left her too cold the night before, and Emily found herself responding almost instinctively, recounting the brief moments after their encounter, the walk home, the library, the lingering thought of him in her mind. As they talked, the conversation unfolded naturally, peppered with small observations. About the city, about the weather, about the mundane routines that somehow felt significant in this moment. There was a subtle tension in the air, the kind that comes from knowing that something unspoken is waiting to be revealed, yet neither of them rushed toward it. Emily noticed the careful way Henry avoided directly revealing too much about himself, the way his responses were measured, deliberate, and tinged with a quiet intensity that invited her to ask more without pressuring her. She could feel the warmth of his presence despite the chill of the evening, a quiet reassurance that contrasted sharply with the loneliness and uncertainty she had felt just a day ago. As the minutes stretched, they moved toward a corner of the lot where the light was brighter, the pavement dry and free from puddles, and the proximity allowed for more relaxed conversation. Emily began to share more of herself, small stories of her childhood, her dreams, and the precariousness of her current life, and Henry listened attentively, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering a word of understanding, never judgment, and always with the subtle weight of curiosity. Each moment seemed to build a bridge of trust, fragile but present, connecting their lives in ways neither fully understood, yet both sensed would be significant. When a distant car engine broke the silence, Emily realized that she had spoken more freely than she had with almost anyone in recent memory, and Henry's calm presence had created a space where vulnerability felt safe. Their conversation lingered late into the evening, stretching into the dim light of approaching dusk, each step and each word carrying the promise of a deeper connection, a story that had begun with a simple act of generosity and was now unfolding into a moment of mutual understanding, anticipation, and the unspoken potential for something far more profound to develop between them. Emily Harris felt a strange shift in the air as Henry Miles finally spoke more openly, reaching into the pocket of his damp coat and producing a small card with his name printed in simple yet elegant font. He handed it to her with a cautious smile, the gesture deliberate, inviting, and careful not to overwhelm. Emily took it, the paper cool and smooth against her fingertips, and read the name aloud, the syllables forming in her mind as if they were the first clue to a larger puzzle she had only glimpsed. She looked up at him, eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of disbelief, unsure whether this card was a promise, a test, or some playful tease. Henry's expression remained calm, his gaze steady but thoughtful, as if he weighed every word he would say next, understanding the potential impact on the fragile connection forming between them. He finally spoke, explaining in measured tones that he had been in the city on business, that his presence at the train station was not a random coincidence, and that he had been observing her from afar for a few days, curious and compelled by the quiet resilience he had sensed in her during their brief encounter. Emily listened, a mixture of shock and fascination running through her, each sentence unraveling more of the mystery she had been pondering, revealing glimpses of life she had never imagined intersecting with her own. The notion that he held a position of authority, influence, and wealth slowly dawned on her, a realization that made her stomach tighten and her mind race with questions about how someone so different could take notice of her in such a human, unassuming way. Henry noted the subtle hesitation in her posture and the way her fingers twitched around the strap of her bag, signs of uncertainty that he found endearing yet indicative of the genuine surprise she felt. He carefully emphasized that he was not there to intimidate, to judge, or to create obligation, but simply to extend an opportunity, a chance to bridge the distance between their worlds with honesty and respect. Emily absorbed every word, the streetlights casting long shadows across the lot as the rain puddles reflected the soft illumination, mirroring the tentative trust she was beginning to place in him. She felt a surge of emotions, a blend of curiosity, apprehension, and a spark of excitement, realizing that this moment, though steeped in uncertainty, carried the weight of possibility, a potential turning point that neither had anticipated. Henry suggested a casual walk to a nearby coffee shop where they could speak more comfortably, and Emily found herself nodding, her nerves tempered by an inexplicable sense of safety in his presence. As they walked side by side through the quiet city streets, the rain having slowed to a gentle drizzle, they exchanged small anecdotes about the neighborhoods they passed, the changes in the city, and the ordinary details of life that somehow felt significant when shared with another person in genuine connection. Emily began to sense that his attention was sincere, that his interest in her went beyond mere curiosity, and a subtle thrill ran through her at the thought that someone from such a different world had chosen to seek her out. The conversation meandered naturally, with pauses filled not by awkwardness but by contemplation, allowing the weight of the revelations to settle and the possibility of a future interaction to take shape. By the time they reached the coffee shop, the night had deepened and the soft glow of the interior lights promised warmth, shelter, and perhaps an opening into a world that Emily had scarcely dared to imagine for herself. In that moment, she realized that their chance meeting, sparked by a simple act of giving a $10 bill in the rain, was evolving into something far more profound than either could have predicted, and as they entered the cozy space together, the air seemed charged with the anticipation of stories yet to be shared, of truths gradually unfolding, and of a connection that might very well change the trajectory of both of their lives. The next morning, Emily Harris woke with a restless energy that mingled excitement with apprehension. The city outside her window was gray and quiet, the streets still damp from an overnight drizzle, and she felt the weight of yesterday's encounter pressing gently against her mind. She prepared for the day as usual, her fingers moving deftly despite the nervous flutter in her chest, arranging her modest belongings, tying the worn laces of her shoes, and pulling on her coat with care. The thought of meeting Henry Miles again filled her with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty, for she knew there was much about him she did not yet understand. As she walked through the familiar streets toward the small community kitchen, her mind replayed their conversation from the night before, the subtle glances, the words carefully chosen, and the promise of more to come. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp pavement and the distant aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Emily arrived at the kitchen to find the warm interior bustling with activity, volunteers moving with purpose, and patrons lining up quietly to receive their meals. She slipped into her usual rhythm, handing out bowls of soup and chatting with those she served, yet her thoughts kept drifting to the card Henry had given her, the way he had looked at her with a mix of curiosity and quiet regard, and the sense that something important was unfolding. Hours passed in a blur of motion and service, and when the lunch rush subsided, she stepped outside to take a brief breath, the afternoon sun struggling through the gray clouds above. It was then that she saw him approaching from down the street, his coat buttoned neatly, hair slightly tousled from the breeze, and eyes focused intently on her. Emily's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of surprise and excitement warming her despite the lingering chill. He approached with measured steps, each one conveying a calm determination, and when he stopped in front of her, he spoke with a quiet earnestness that made her lean in to catch every word. He explained that he had been considering a proposal for her, a chance to work with a small project he was overseeing, a community initiative that needed someone with her insight and empathy. Emily listened, both intrigued and apprehensive, as he laid out the details, emphasizing that there was no expectation beyond her willingness to contribute, and that her perspective was valued because it was genuine and unfiltered. She felt a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism, the offer seeming too good to be true, yet the sincerity in his tone and the way he watched her reaction convinced her to consider it seriously. She asked questions, each answered with patience and clarity, revealing just enough to spark trust without overwhelming her with the breadth of his influence or resources. As they spoke, the city around them seemed to fade, the distant sounds of traffic and pedestrians paling in comparison to the focus and intensity of the interaction before her. Emily felt a growing sense of connection, the realization that the $10 bill she had given in the rain had been the first link in a chain that had led them here, and that her small act of kindness had created an opportunity that might alter the course of her life. Henry suggested they walk to a nearby park where they could discuss the project further, the fresh air providing space for contemplation and reflection. As they moved together, Emily shared more of her experiences, the challenges she had faced, the late nights, the moments of doubt, and the dreams she had long held in quiet. Henry listened attentively, occasionally nodding, offering gentle encouragement and insight, and she felt a quiet confidence blooming within her, a sense that someone believed in her abilities and worth. By the time they reached the park, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the wet grass, and Emily understood that this encounter, born from a simple act of generosity, had opened a door to possibilities she had never dared imagine, the promise of trust, collaboration, and perhaps something deeper awaiting just beyond the horizon. The following evening, Emily Harris found herself walking alone through the city streets, the sun long set and the streetlights casting a soft golden glow over the wet pavement. Her mind was restless, turning over the events of the past few days and the conversations she had shared with Henry Miles. The promise of the community project he had invited her to lead weighed on her in both excitement and anxiety, a sense of responsibility she had not anticipated, and a fear that she might not live up to expectations. As she approached the familiar corner near the small cafe where they had first sat together discussing the initiative, she noticed a subtle change in the rhythm of the city around her. Whispers, quick glances from passers-by, and a faint buzz of cell phones pointed toward the presence of rumor, an undercurrent she had not considered before. Emily slowed her pace, her stomach tightening with unease, sensing that the world outside their interactions was beginning to intrude on the delicate connection she had with Henry. When she reached the cafe, she found Henry already there, standing near the entrance, his expression calm but tinged with concern as he observed her approach. She waved hesitantly, and he offered a small smile, though the crease of worry remained on his brow. They sat together at a corner table, the low hum of the cafe providing a comforting backdrop to the storm of thoughts in her mind. Henry asked about her day, but Emily struggled to concentrate, her attention repeatedly drawn to the subtle changes in how the baristas and patrons glanced at her, the whispers that floated briefly across the room. She realized that someone might have caught wind of her association with Henry, and the thought made her cheeks flush with embarrassment and a pang of anger at the world that seemed to scrutinize her kindness as if it were a spectacle. She spoke carefully, weighing her words, and Henry listened intently, his gaze steady, offering reassurance that their project and her participation were grounded in genuine intent and not the judgments of others. Yet the unease lingered, and Emily found herself questioning how the delicate trust between them could withstand the scrutiny and misunderstanding of the outside world. They continued their discussion about the initiative, planning volunteer shifts, and community engagement, but every conversation was tinged with the awareness that rumor could erode confidence and distort perception. Emily felt the tension rise in her chest, a mixture of frustration and determination as she resolved to focus on the tangible work, to let her actions speak louder than the words of strangers. Henry, sensing the pressure, suggested they take a short walk to the nearby park to clear their minds, and Emily agreed, grateful for the temporary escape from the crowded streets. As they strolled under the lamplight, the shadows stretching long across the paths, she shared more of her worries and doubts, and Henry responded with measured encouragement, emphasizing that integrity and consistent effort would always outweigh the judgments of others. The evening air was cool and carried the faint scent of rain from earlier, a reminder of the unpredictable world they navigated, yet also a symbol of cleansing, renewal, and clarity. Emily felt a shift within herself, a quiet determination strengthening alongside her admiration and growing trust in Henry. She understood that navigating both the responsibilities of the project and the scrutiny of outsiders would require patience, courage, and steadfastness, but the knowledge that Henry believed in her abilities and character provided an anchor against the tide of uncertainty. By the time they returned toward the cafe, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to follow through on her involvement with the initiative, and a deepened connection with Henry, knowing that together they could withstand the challenges, misunderstandings, and rumors that the world might cast in their path, and that their bond, rooted in mutual respect and kindness, was resilient enough to grow even stronger in the face of scrutiny. Emily Harris felt her pulse quicken as the tension that had been quietly building over the past days reached a climax. Rumors had begun to circulate throughout the community center and even reached the local volunteers that she was somehow connected to Henry Miles, the man whose presence had seemed so coincidental yet significant. Whispers followed her as she moved through the bustling kitchen, eyes following her more closely than usual, some with suspicion, others with curiosity. The weight of misunderstanding pressed heavily upon her shoulders, and she could feel her confidence waver, the foundation of trust and goodwill she had built feeling fragile and threatened. Henry noticed the subtle change in her demeanor immediately, his sharp eyes taking in the slight slump of her shoulders, the hesitation in her steps, and the way her gaze darted nervously toward the corners of the room. He approached her quietly, placing a reassuring hand on her elbow, the warmth of his touch grounding her amidst the storm of judgment and doubt. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and Henry leaned in slightly, his voice calm, yet commanding enough to cut through the murmurs around them. He spoke softly but clearly, explaining that misunderstandings and gossip were inevitable whenever people became interested in something unfamiliar, particularly when it involved someone of his standing. He emphasized that her worth and integrity were evident in every action she had taken, and that no rumor or misinterpretation could diminish the honesty and care she had shown. Emily listened intently, absorbing his words as a shield against the sting of false impressions. Despite the anxious flutter in her chest, she felt a measure of relief, recognizing that she was not alone in facing the scrutiny and that Henry's presence was both protective and validating. Together, they addressed the volunteers and staff, clarifying any misconceptions without confrontation, their combined sincerity and composure gradually shifting the mood from suspicion to understanding. The act of standing together, united in purpose and honesty, served as a turning point, reinforcing the bond that had begun with a simple $10 bill in the rain. As the evening continued, Emily felt a renewed sense of empowerment, the realization that integrity and consistent action could withstand doubt and gossip. She and Henry moved to a quieter corner of the kitchen to continue planning the community initiative, discussing practical details with focus and care, their conversation flowing easily despite the residual tension. From earlier, each plan they made, each volunteer assignment they reviewed, felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of agency over a situation that had threatened to undermine their progress. The sun set fully, casting long shadows through the windows and painting the interior in warm golden tones, and Emily felt the steady pulse of possibility in every task and every interaction. By the time they concluded their meeting, the atmosphere had shifted from one of challenge to one of collaboration and anticipation, with Emily standing taller, her confidence restored, and Henry offering quiet but steady encouragement. In that moment, she understood that facing public doubt and private anxiety had strengthened her resolve and deepened the connection between them. A reminder that even in moments of conflict and misunderstanding, trust, patience, and authenticity could guide the way forward, setting the stage for the meaningful journey and partnership that awaited both of them in the days to come. Weeks passed, and Emily Harris found herself fully immersed in the community initiative that Henry Miles had invited her to join. The small office space above the kitchen had become her second home, filled with bustling volunteers, neatly organized supplies, and a constant hum of activity. Every morning, she arrived early, reviewing schedules and coordinating outreach efforts, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose that she had rarely felt before. Henry often arrived soon after, and together they navigated the complex web of logistics, ensuring that every aspect of the project ran smoothly. Emily had taken on the leadership of a mobile soup kitchen, coordinating routes to reach neighborhoods that were often overlooked, and every decision she made carried tangible impact, from the hours of service to the quantities of food prepared. As she checked her notes and made adjustments to the volunteer schedule, she could see the gratitude in the eyes of the people they served, the relief in their expressions, and the quiet joy in knowing that someone cared enough to provide for them. Henry, standing nearby with his coat draped over the back of a chair, observed her with a mixture of admiration and pride, noting the steady confidence she had developed and the calm authority she now exuded despite the occasional hiccup of coordination or unexpected shortage of supplies. Emily had grown into a natural leader, her initial hesitance replaced by assertiveness and clarity, and the volunteers responded to her guidance with respect and enthusiasm, drawn not only to her organization skills, but to the warmth and sincerity that radiated from her presence. Together, she and Henry planned new outreach programs, strategized on expanding their reach, and brainstormed ways to engage more volunteers and community members, each conversation deepening their understanding of each other's perspectives and capabilities. During one particularly busy afternoon, Emily paused to review the delivery routes for the mobile kitchen, realizing that a new neighborhood on the edge of the city had been underserved for weeks. She immediately called a meeting with Henry and the volunteers, outlining the plan to deliver food and essential supplies, emphasizing the importance of consistency and attention to detail. Henry listened attentively, offering suggestions without diminishing her authority, and Emily felt a profound sense of partnership, the balance of guidance and autonomy, creating a dynamic that energized her work. As they prepared to leave for the route, the streets glistened from a light drizzle, and Emily noted the subtle shift in the city's rhythm, the quiet anticipation of residents who would soon receive care and sustenance. Each stop along the route reinforced her commitment, as she distributed warm meals, blankets, and comforting words, observing the relief and smiles that spread through the neighborhoods. Henry walked beside her, occasionally handing out supplies, occasionally engaging in brief conversations with residents, but mostly giving her space to lead, his support unwavering and quiet. By the time they returned to the office, the sun had begun to set, casting long golden shadows through the windows, and Emily felt a sense of exhaustion mingled with satisfaction. She reviewed the notes for the next day, made adjustments for unforeseen challenges, and reflected on how much her confidence had grown, not only in her ability to lead, but in the understanding that her efforts could create meaningful change. Henry approached her as she finished her preparations, offering a quiet compliment on her diligence and vision, and Emily felt the warmth of acknowledgement settle in her chest, a quiet reassurance that their shared work was making a difference. As the evening drew to a close and the office grew quiet, Emily lingered for a moment, looking around at the volunteers, the equipment, and the notes she had meticulously prepared. She felt a sense of accomplishment and hope, understanding that her life had shifted in ways she had never anticipated, and that her bond with Henry, built on trust, shared purpose, and mutual respect, had become a guiding force in the transformative work they were accomplishing together. The evening of the community exhibition arrived, and Emily Harris stood nervously near the entrance of the small gallery space that had been transformed into a showcase for the projects she and Henry Miles had worked on together. The walls were adorned with photographs of the neighborhoods they had served, each image capturing moments of genuine connection, joy, and relief, a testament to the impact of their efforts. Volunteers and community members milled about, their chatter creating a warm, lively atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the quiet intensity Emily had felt in previous days. Henry appeared beside her, offering a reassuring smile that conveyed both pride and anticipation. He leaned close and whispered that the moment was theirs, a chance to celebrate the tangible results of dedication, kindness, and collaboration. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every challenge, every long hour, every moment of doubt, and how it had all led to this point. As she stepped forward to greet the first attendees, she noticed that a small envelope had been placed discreetly on the reception table, bearing her name in careful, elegant script. Curious, she opened it to find a neatly folded $10 bill, the very same one she had given to Henry at the train station weeks ago, pressed carefully into the envelope alongside a delicate silver ring. Her heart raced as she looked up at him, realizing that he had orchestrated this symbolic gesture, tying together the act of generosity that at first brought them together with the appreciation, respect, and deep affection he now held for her. Henry guided her through the gallery, introducing her to guests, volunteers, and supporters, but Emily could scarcely focus on anything except the thread connecting that first act of kindness to the recognition and commitment represented by the $10 bill and the ring. Each display, each story told by attendees, mirrored the journey she had traveled, from uncertainty and struggle to meaningful achievement, and the presence of Henry by her side amplified the significance of the evening. As the crowd gathered for the small ceremony at the center of the room, Henry took her hand gently, leading her to a spot bathed in soft golden light. He spoke to the attendees briefly about the mission, the dedication of volunteers, and the extraordinary commitment Emily had shown, his voice carrying a quiet authority that drew attention and respect. Then, turning to her with a sincerity that made her chest tighten, he knelt on one knee, presenting the silver ring and the $10 bill together, his eyes locking with hers in a gaze filled with warmth, admiration, and a promise that extended beyond material symbols. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as the room seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them connected in that profound moment. The ring represented a bond, a commitment, and the $10 bill symbolized the journey from a simple act of giving to a transformative partnership rooted in trust, compassion, and mutual recognition. She whispered her agreement, overwhelmed with a mixture of gratitude, joy, and anticipation for the life that lay ahead. The crowd erupted softly into applause, yet Emily barely registered it, her focus entirely on Henry and the shared understanding that this moment marked the culmination of a path built on small gestures, authentic care, and the courage to believe in another human being. The exhibition continued around them, filled with laughter, conversation, and admiration for the work that had been accomplished, but Emily and Henry remained at the center, bound by the history of a $10 bill, a shared vision, and the promise of countless days to come, the gallery space itself bearing witness to the tangible proof that kindness, dedication, and love could intertwine to create something lasting, beautiful, and profoundly human. The months that followed were filled with purpose, collaboration, and quiet moments of joy for Emily Harris and Henry Miles. The community initiative flourished under Emily's leadership, expanding to reach neighborhoods that had long been overlooked, each day bringing new faces, new stories, and the tangible satisfaction of making a difference. Volunteers and residents alike recognized Emily's dedication and warmth, while Henry supported her in the background, providing guidance when necessary, but allowing her to take ownership of the project. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped low over the city skyline and cast a golden glow across the streets, Emily and Henry found themselves walking together to a small cafe near the waterfront, a tradition they had developed to discuss the day's work and share quiet conversation. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from an earlier drizzle, and the city hummed softly around them, the lights reflecting off the wet pavement like tiny beacons. Henry turned to Emily, taking her hands gently in his, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them connected in a quiet intimacy that had grown from weeks of trust, shared challenges, and mutual admiration. He spoke softly, recounting the journey from the first encounter at the train station, the $10 bill in the rain, and how that simple act had sparked a chain of events that neither could have anticipated. Emily listened, her chest tight with emotion, remembering the uncertainty, the struggle, and the fragile hope that had carried her through the initial days, and she realized how far she had come, not only in confidence and leadership, but in understanding the power of kindness and human connection. Henry then reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, delicately wrapped box, presenting it to Emily with a smile that combined anticipation, affection, and reassurance. She opened it carefully to find a simple yet elegant silver ring, a symbol of commitment, paired with the $10 bill she had given him, preserved and encased, a tangible reminder of the moment that had brought them together. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, the significance of the gesture overwhelming her with gratitude, recognition, and joy. Henry spoke again, quietly asking Emily to share her life with him, not out of obligation, but as a partnership built on trust, respect, and the understanding that small acts of generosity can blossom into profound connections. Emily nodded, a smile spreading across her face, and whispered her agreement, the tension and uncertainty of the past months dissolving into a sense of clarity, security, and anticipation for their future together. As the evening light softened into twilight, they embraced, the city around them alive with the sounds of distant traffic, laughter, and the subtle hum of life continuing on. Yet for Emily and Henry, the moment was theirs, complete and affirming. The success of the community project, the bonds forged through effort and compassion, and the mutual recognition of each other's strength and kindness had culminated in this defining chapter, a story of hope realized and love solidified. Walking side by side, along the waterfront, hands intertwined and hearts aligned, they felt the promise of all the days to come, knowing that the small, deliberate gestures of courage and generosity, the $10 bill, the acts of trust, and a persistent belief in goodness, had created a life together rich with purpose, connection, and a clear, enduring path forward.